Hey there, I'm a DIY track guy, this is my humble garage, and today is Torsen Limited Slip Differential Installation Day. Let's go. Before I went and put this used differential into my Miata, I wanted to make sure I took some time to give it a good cleaning, paint it up nicely so that it won't rust, and when you take a glance, it's not disgusting and rusty. Off camera, I took a wire wheel on an angle grinder to the entire pumpkin here and the arms. I also have a spare set of these lower differential plates. So cleaning these plates off, getting the rubber off, and trying to get any rust off of this thing, as well as cleaning off the differential axles and drive shaft, was a very dirty job. I didn't get any of that on camera. You're just gonna have to believe me when I say I chiseled off using a hammer and chisel the rubber triangles on this thing, and then used an angle grinder with a wire wheel to get them relatively rust free. After wire wheeling everything, I went over it with this Pour 15 metal prep. I poured a little bit of this into a cup and then used this brush to brush on this differential as well as the brackets. The problem with Pour 15 is that it dries very quickly. You can't seal it up in its own container. So what I did is I had a whole bunch of these baby bottles, and I kind of took the 1 liter or so Pour 15 and poured it into a number of these. This is actually probably 2 or 3 years old. It's still liquid in there, so I know that it hasn't dried out, so that's great. So as expected, I cannot remove this lid. Unfortunately, that means that there's metal bits in the Pour 15, but there's not much we can do about that. This is some really riveting stuff. Feel free to skip over this part. Trying to take care not to paint the bolts. I don't want these to be stuck and welded in here in the event that I need to take it apart. So after 1 coat of Pour 15, this is what it looks like. We got ourselves a nice rust covering coating here. As you can see from what I poured into the cup, there's still quite a bit left. So I'm gonna go ahead and paint up these brackets here and see how far I can get with the axles and the drive shaft. So I'm gonna go really liberal on this thing because it was really, really rusty. So rusty that I was afraid after I ground off the rust there'd be nothing left. So essentially that's it. So let's hang this guy up. This is probably not necessary, but I'm gonna go ahead and Pour 15 these half shafts. Next up is this drive shaft. You may be wondering why it looks so nice already. I cleaned up, had to grind off all the rust and everything and old paint off this thing. So I figured I'd hit it with the spray paint for this larger area and then just go for the ends with the Pour 15. All right, what are we working with here? Well, you kind of already know what's going on. This is the differential that has been Pour 15'd on the front of it, and I have used some Duplicolor engine enamel in the aluminum variety just to give the aluminum housing of it a little bit of a freshen up. Added some new washers for the drain plug and the fill plug. We got ourselves these bushing mounts. We also have our white line bushings. We also got ourselves some red line 75W90. Over here we have our axles. And finally we got ourselves the drive shaft, which is looking pretty good. Lastly, we got some brand new axle nuts. This is a requirement actually. Once you dent it, it's not reusable. And these are cheap, so I just picked up 2 replacements. So the first step is to take these, grease them up, and put them in here. All right, usually people tap this in with a hammer. I'm just gonna see if I can give it the old slap. High five. We're at the right rear corner here, and we need to get this axle nut off. We first must get rid of this little dent that you put into it. To do so, we can use a punch of some sort. So we've just removed this dent here in the axle nut. So the axle nut is a 29 millimeter. Now that we've got the dent removed, the center cap is off the wheel and it's back on the ground. I could use a breaker bar on this, or we can use an impact gun. So the objective here is to remove the axle from the hub. These are famously known for being stuck in here. They're seized and require, at the worst, a press to get out. Now I'm hoping that this is not the case for mine, but what I want to do here is to try it first before I disassemble everything else. So how I'm going to do that is like this. Already come down a little bit, so I'm going to try to tap this, see if it can go. Oh, look at that, the axle comes out so easily. And the axle just popped out. Following the axle back here, it connects over to the diff, but it doesn't go all the way into the diff in a 1.6. In the 1.6, you can see that it's actually bolted to a flange. So we can see two exposed bolts there, or nuts rather, and then there's two more on top. Huzzah! One axle out. .6 drive shaft, come on down. You're the next contestant on Let's Get This Crappy Open Diff Out of Here. They seem to be about the same length. The washer one is the one that's further back. This one without a washer goes on this collar here. Come on! Who's a good boy? Come on out. You're a good boy. There we go. It's all in the wrist. Ta-da! Almost forgot to put these sleeves in, so just gonna give it a liberal amount of grease so they'll slide in real nice like. There we go. It's not lined up. I just think sit really nicely, right? So that's a plan. we are ready to put the axles in here. So we'll just go ahead and pull out this paper towel that I have in here. Yep. All right, so here is the offending seal. From what I understand, we can use a pry bar, a small one, get it onto the metal part of the seal, give it a pry, and there we go. We have our old seal out, and notice that the spring is missing. So, oops. Okay, the new seal, just gonna try to get a little bit of oil and just give it a little bit of lubrication, maybe a little bit of lube on this surface as well. Next step is to take the old seal, kind of just pop it here. This seal just needs to be flush with the outside here. Okay, I think that's good. There's a little chamfer around here, and it's just at the end of the chamfer. So, just like saying the word chamfer. Chamfer. Let me explain the problem we were having bolting up the diff to the PPF. This is the PPF, or the power plant frame, that ties the transmission and the diff together as a unit. The differential is assembled on the PPF with the diff housing and the spacers sandwiched in between the upper and lower parts of the PPF itself. The issue was lining everything up. The lower spacer can be bolted to the diff housing, so that was fine. The upper part of the diff housing, where the upper spacer sits, is a flat surface. That means that the upper figure 8 spacer can move around on that surface and can become misaligned with the bolt holes. Also, the long bolts thread into the upper mushroom nuts. These nuts are splined on the outside and are supposed to sink in and bite into that figure 8 spacer as the long bolts are torqued up and pull everything together. The way we were trying to assemble this was to slide the diff housing and the upper spacer into the PPF, eyeballing the holes to line it all up the best we could. Then I inserted the long bolts poking out of the top of the PPF. Taking the mushroom nuts, I threaded them onto the bolts and attempted to tighten them up. However, the mushroom nuts wouldn't align properly with the figure 8 spacer and the bolts would just spin. I would get one lined up properly, but then the upper spacer would move out of alignment for the other bolt. It was all super frustrating. Adding insult to injury, I didn't notice that the front long bolt's threads were damaged and couldn't engage the mushroom nut properly. The solution? With the PPF loosened from the transmission, we moved it away from the diff to give some room to work. Inserting the mushroom nuts from the top of the PPF, I took the figure 8 spacer and placed it into position to line it up with the spline nuts. Using 2 short bolts from my parts bin with the same thread as the mushroom nuts, I tightened it up so that they would sink into the spacer and get it flush against the PPF. Because the mushroom nuts are a really tight fit on the spacer, when the short bolts were removed, the spacer and nuts were held firmly into place on the PPF. Assembling the diff from there was much easier. The diff housing slid in between the lower PPF and the upper figure 8 spacer, and I tapped it into place with a hammer to line it all up. We also loosened the diff carrier bolts to allow the nose some up and down adjustment. From there, I got the rear bolt tightened up, and then I noticed the damaged threads on the front long bolt. I reused the bolt from my 1.6 diff, it threaded in, and I torqued it up to spec. So this worked for us, but I'm sure there's got to be a better way. If you know that better way, please do leave a comment. Alright, so what did we learn today? After getting the car back together, taking it for a spin, and getting a little bit of time away from that long night with my buddy Jesse, lying on our backs on the garage floor, the installation's not too bad. Clearly the hardest part was getting those mushroom nuts installed on the PPF with the diff housing all tightened up and aligned correctly. Obviously we had our share of problems that night, but I think if we just took a break from lying on our backs staring at the problem, we probably would have come up with a solution sooner. So top tip there, take your time, do your research, and if you get stuck, take a break. If a useless guy like me can get this job done, you can do it too. Hopefully this video has something helpful, and I encourage you to just dive in and get it done. That's all from the Mostly Useless Garage. Take care of yourselves and the ones that you love. You keep being awesome. I'll keep being useless. Thank you so much for watching.